All right, so this is going to be a highlight of the 263. It's going to highlight some of its strengths, some of its weaknesses, how to play it, some things you want to do, and then highlight how to fight the T95 uh, to help some that are potentially struggling in facing against that tank in particular. All the other tanks on here is pretty much easy peasy when it comes to fight. So let's get into it.
But we created a place between truth and overrated. If I could just see it all, just like a fly on the wall, would I be able to accept what I can't control? And would I share what I saw, or just sit back and indulge?
So right here I stopped, not because I needed to, but because I was so far ahead of my backup, I pretty much just posed myself as like a watch to let them get ahead of me. As a turretless tank destroyer, I didn't want to go too far because if I went too far, I would it'd be more difficult for me to recover from that based on the fact that I'm turretless. So I needed to make sure I had backup before going ahead.
I'm on the run from a thief I let into my head. I know I hold the key, so don't be scared when I turn and shout. I don't think I need you anymore. Take your words and your lies and just beat it. I don't think I need you anymore. Take the hurt and the pain, I don't need it. I wanna live, I wanna be the change we can all be.
So I know this is. Well, let me see if I can get this to go a little more. All right, there we go. So this is the first thing to pay attention to 263. This is pretty much the angle that the T95 and the FEF 2E, the Tier 7 Heavy can see. That's pretty much what they can see. Not enough. They're looking more. This is more what they're seeing, as you can tell. So this angle from the 263, where it's just above the underbelly of the 263, is kind of what you want. And I'm going to zoom in the 263 a little closer so you can see it more. But if I get any closer, it's going to mess up my angle. You're not going to really be able to see what they're seeing. But let me get a little closer. Well, this is pretty much as close as I can get. Reason why this is so important, because from this angle, they can't shoot the underbelly. Now, the 263, it doesn't need a big hill. The bigger the hill, the weaker the 263 gets. So it needs a small hills. Flat ground, you're going to need to do some side scraping, but when you can have these little hills like what you've got here, where you can just kind of bump it out a little, as you'll see, you're about to see me wiggle it out so that I never expose my underbelly to the T95. So he can't ever penetrate it, because essentially what he's looking at is just a straight ramp. So every shot he's going to shoot is going to skim off like it's hitting a ramp. It's going to go off to Mars or something like that. Someplace we don't care. But it's not going to do any damage to us, because that's the angle you want. Right there. That's kind of what you want. Now I'm going to have to edge it out more because I can't shoot at the T95 because I can't crest enough. As you can tell, my gun's as low as it can go. So terrible heavy cresters. It's not the best cresting TD. You just need a little bit of a lump on the ground to cover this part of the 263. The other thing, since I've got the crew stunned, I want to highlight is the 263's greatest weakness is arty. Artillery tear this thing to bits. And you're looking at the reason why. It's an open cockpit tank. So arty's going to do a lot more damage on it. One thing I highly recommend, and I have installed on this, is a spall liner. You have to have a spall liner on this thing. More important than crew vent, more important than gun rammer. That is the most important spall liner because of this arty, of this weakness to arty.
We can just learn to believe. We can just learn to
So, all right, right here. This is going to be, as in this particular battle, going to be the best example I can get to. But it should actually, it'll carry over regardless of whether you can actually see the tank or the outline of the tank. So as you'll notice, you've got essentially two commander hatches on this tank. The back one is the one with the machine gun on it. The front one is up by the gun. The one in the back with the machine gun, that's got less armor than the one in the front. So if you have a lower penetration gun or a gun with a lower penetrating value, you're pretty much going to want to shoot at the back. Your drawback to that is because it's further back, it's harder to hit. The one in the front, it's easier to hit, but it's more heavily armored, so you're more likely to bounce if you have lower pen guns. 263's gun, which has a penetrating value of 270 millimeters, so it's got plenty of penetrating value to get through that thing. If you hit, I want to say if you hit about 175 or more, maybe 200, you're good. Now, if for some reason you don't have a gun, you have a gun with a high dispersion rate, you're far away from the T95, and hitting the commander hatch is a little bit out of the option. Because of that, you do have another option. Another option does not make it any easier. So if you look at the T95 from the front without a turret, you'll see this circular motion underneath where the turret melds in with the body of the tank. So where the round part ends and the tracks come up on both sides, that spot is a weakness. If you shoot the T95 right here, you'll bounce that 100% of the time. You're going to pretty much want to aim right there and right there. That's what makes the T95 such a beast. Its weaknesses from the front are minimal, and it's extremely hard to take advantage of. But they are there. So even with me highlighting, you'll even see that I bounce a lot. Even aiming for these weak spots, that's just either I suck as a player or they're just tricky to aim at and get at. Either way, the T95 is a beast, so don't be discouraged if for some reason you bounce and you're not penetrating. Just keep coming at it. Sorry, I'm rambling.
And one by one we all became numb. We were making the bullets to a broken gun. If I could just see it all, just like a fly on a wall, would I be able to accept what I can't control? And would I share what I saw?
So I'm going to go ahead and speed up to when I'm going face to face with the next 295. That's pretty much the next thing I want to show. How to go toe to toe with the 295 and black ground in front of me.
I know I hold the keys, so don't be scared when I touch out. I don't think I
So the T95 here, he just fired wrong. He's getting frantic and desperate. He fired and he bounced off the tracks on the upper side of the armor. Didn't even track him. Right here, he's breakfast food. His gun cannot get down low enough to hit the underbelly of the 263. And from the angle he's shooting at, because he's such a flat tank, his shot is essentially hitting into that ramp that I was talking to you about over at that hillside. He's essentially shooting into a ramp that's going to shoot every one of his shots to Mars. And you'll see him every time he tries to penetrate, you'll see the shot bounce because I basically keep kissing him every time he reloads.
we can all be kings and queens. We can just learn to believe. We can just
So if you're wondering how to keep that, go ahead and just to stabilize your gun, drive into him. And if you drive into him while he's doing that, you'll find it helps stabilize your gun. So this is an area, we know there's a prototype somewhere in this area. The prototype's gotten a kill. So we know he's somewhere off to the right there. We got the Chrysler there, and we got the M6A2E1. Now the Proto, I had an idea was behind buildings. That's why I stopped where I did. These two are not going to be able to penetrate from this area, from this angle. The 263, even on a flat hill, is going to be able to bounce both their guns. That's why I stopped where I did.
The other night I had a dream. It was a world full of kings and queens.
So the reason I went to this spot right here, and you'll notice it as I push up, is as the M6A2E1 moved up to try to make a play, he got spotted. Now, as you know, I noticed I didn't give him a line. He would have had to start coming up, and I was watching him so that I would have backed up and been able to have my front towards him. The next thing you're going to see him do is he's going to try to drive up to get a flank on me, is what you're going to see in a little bit. But the two Tier 8 heavies, I apologize, didn't drive up. They're going to drive up and keep him from flanking. Now I get aggressive here, finish him off, but I took a hit from the M6A2E1. Now this is what I'm talking right here. If you ever find yourself looking at an M6A2E1 in this angle in a Tier 8 tank, couple things to keep in mind. That underbelly is at a 45-degree angle. So pretty much shooting the underbelly is going to, unless you have a gun with a high penetrating value, shooting the underbelly is not going to be a good idea. If you're in a Tier 7 or 6 tank facing this thing, and this is the front you're looking at, you're doomed. This thing is a death wish for that. So if you're in a Tier 8 tank, you have a turret ring there that is a weak spot. It's extremely hard to hit, but it is a weak spot. Your commander hatch on the turret is going to be your best bet from this thing, is shooting up there. Now, as far as other weak spots, there might be a couple other ones, but I don't know if they are there. Those are the only ones that I know. But as you'll see, I'm going to shoot at the underbelly with this tank because, like I said, the 263 can tear through that like a book.
We couldn't see it, but we created a place between truth and overrated. If I could just see.
So I would have actually got Top Gun on this match if I wouldn't have done what you're about. Yeah, because as I come up here, I fired and bounced off his tracks. But that's the end of the match, and that's a game over. So I had a fun game.